I'm Marlene Kessler, 68 years old, and the night I showed up at my son's house uninvited still plays in my mind like it happened yesterday. I was dressed in navy, clutching a gift box, standing on the porch of a home I had helped them buy. Music spilled out the open door, laughter too, but none of it was for me. They had invited the whole neighborhood, even folks they barely knew, but not me. Not the woman who had paid their mortgage for 4 straight years. When Michaela saw me standing there, she didn't smile. And Ashton, my only son, looked past me like I was a problem to solve. By the end of that evening, I would learn the true cost of silence. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever poured your heart into family only to be left out in the cold. I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom home in rural Indiana, the kind with creaky floorboards and curtains my mother sewed herself. We didn't have much, but we had respect. My father worked in the mill until his back gave out, and my mother took in ironing from neighbors to make ends meet. They taught me to value quiet strength, to keep my promises, and never let pride get in the way of helping someone you love. I carried those lessons with me through 40 years as a math teacher, raising 2 children with my husband Walter, a trucker who never said much but had a good, steady heart. We were the kind of couple who paid cash for used cars, clipped coupons for Sunday dinners, and set a little aside each month for retirement. When Walter passed away 5 years ago, a heart attack early morning, nothing dramatic. The house felt too quiet. Our daughter had moved to Oregon years before, chasing a new life. She calls on holidays. But our son, Darren, still lived nearby. He was all I had left of the life Walter and I built together. He'd married Michaela, a dental administrator from town, polished, confident, always with a to-do list and perfect lipstick. I remember their wedding clearly, the way Darren looked at her like he'd won a prize. I believed then that she'd be good for him. Maybe she was. It started with a visit. Darren stopped by one evening, still in his work boots, holding a cup of cold tea. "Mama," he said, not quite meeting my eye. We found a house. 2 bedrooms, backyard, quiet street near a park. It's everything we dreamed of. I waited. He didn't ask. Darren never was one to ask directly, but I knew what he needed. He named a number. I gave it without flinching, nearly a third of what Walter had left me. "Of course, it's a loan," Michaela said as we signed the papers. "We'll pay it back." I nodded. What else was I going to do? Say no to my only child? At first they were grateful. They invited me for barbecues, called me to show off new curtains or backsplash tile. I brought pies, towels, little things for the house. But by the end of the first year, something shifted. The calls grew fewer. My visits shorter. Michaela always had a migraine or was heading out. Darren would smile awkwardly and make excuses. Then came the missed payments. I found out by accident calling the bank about my own account. I didn't call Darren. I didn't want to embarrass him. I just started sending money straight to the mortgage company. Quietly. Month after month. I told myself it was temporary, but 4 years passed. 4 years of silent checks and thankless holidays. Their house got bigger, new furniture, sleek appliances, vacations I only heard about from neighbors. Meanwhile, my roof leaked. I kept saying I'd call someone but never did. It was the only way I felt needed. As long as I paid that mortgage, I was part of Darren's world, even if I barely set foot in the house anymore. And then one Tuesday, my neighbor stopped me on the sidewalk and asked, "What are you wearing to the housewarming?" I blinked. What housewarming? Darren and Michaela had invited the whole street. Everyone but me. I didn't cry. Not then. But I circled Saturday on my calendar. And I started planning what I'd wear. On Saturday evening, just after 6, I stepped outside in my navy dress and closed the front door behind me. The sky over Stockton had turned a soft gray, the kind that holds the day's warmth a little longer. I'd tied a white ribbon around the gift box silverware I'd bought from that little store downtown, where Michaela always shops. It had cost almost everything I'd saved for porch repairs, but I didn't want her to look at it and find a reason to roll her eyes. The ribbon had come undone twice while I waited for the time to pass. I retied it and stood by the window watching for headlights. Willow arrived exactly when she said she would. Her yellow dress stood out even in the dimming light, and she carried a bottle of wine with a paper tag hanging from the neck. She smiled when I opened the door. "You're going," she said, surprised, but pleased. I nodded, not quite trusting myself to speak. "Good," she said. "I'll drive." We didn't talk much on the way there. She kept the conversation light books she'd just ordered for the library, something about a new reading program for third graders. I was grateful for that. I didn't need sympathy. I just needed to get through the next few hours without falling apart. When we turned onto their street, I saw the rows of parked cars before I saw the house. There must have been at least 20 lined up along the curb, some of them pulled slightly onto the grass. Light poured from the windows, warm and golden. Music spilled from inside, something upbeat, the kind of thing I wouldn't know the name of. I could already hear laughter glasses clinking. Willow cut the engine and turned to me. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded again and stepped out of the car. My knees felt tight, like they didn't want to move forward. Still, I followed her up the walkway to the house I had helped them keep. The door was already ajar. Music drifted out, and so did the smell of something rich, garlic butter, maybe a roast. Willow rang the bell anyway. A moment later, a young man opened it. He held a half-full wine glass and smiled, as if he'd been expecting someone else. "Hey there," he said. "You must be neighbors. Come on in." We stepped into a hallway that looked nothing like the one I remembered. The old beige walls were gone, replaced by deep blue paint and framed abstract prints. The hardwood floors had been covered with gleaming tiles. The furniture was all new, designer-looking, sleek, modern. There wasn't a trace of anything I'd given them. No towel sets, no pie plates. Not even the geranium I'd brought over their first summer here. Willow disappeared toward the kitchen, promising to bring us both something to drink. I stayed where I was standing near the corner of the living room, still holding the gift box like a purse. Nobody noticed me. The guests were younger couples in their 30s, dressed for cocktails, not casseroles. Their voices rose and fell in little bursts of laughter. I kept scanning the room, looking for Darren. "Mom!" His voice came from behind me. I turned and saw him standing near the back of the room, holding a glass, eyes wide. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. "I came to congratulate you," I said, smiling gently, trying not to look at all the people staring past me. "For the new furniture, the housewarming, Michaela's promotion." "I brought you something." I offered him the box. He didn't take it. He looked around the room, shifting from foot to foot. "You should have called," he said. "Let me know you were coming." "I shouldn't need to call," I replied. "You're my son." He hesitated, then said, "Let's go to the kitchen." He led me through the crowd. I could feel the eyes on us, polite confusion, maybe curiosity. In the kitchen, it was quieter. A few guests stood near the island, nibbling from a cheese board, but no one said anything to us. Willow waved from the far end of the room. Darren didn't wave back. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked once we were near the back wall. "Why wasn't I invited?" "It wasn't that serious," he said. "Just a few people last minute. Michaela wanted to do something small." "You handed out invitations," I said. "Willow got hers 3 days ago." He looked down. "It was Michaela's idea, and you went along with it." Before he could answer, I heard her voice from the doorway. "Darren." "There you are." Michaela walked in like she owned the room, and in a way, maybe she did. Her dress was black, fitted, expensive. Her necklace caught the light. When she saw me, she stopped. "Beatrice," she said, managing a smile. "What a surprise. I brought you something, I said, holding out the box again. Silverware for the new furniture. She took it with 2 fingers, then said, You should have told us you were coming. Tonight's a special evening. It's a different kind of crowd. I thought as your mother-in-law, I counted. She smiled tightly. Of course. But tonight, we're celebrating my promotion. Clinic manager now. Congratulations, I said. We were going to tell you over lunch on Sunday. There was no lunch planned, I said, keeping my voice even. She looked at Darren, then back at me. Well, she said thank you for coming, and for the gift. I'd like to see the new furniture, I said. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway. She nodded and turned away. Darren walked me back into the living room and began talking about the sofa, how long it took to choose the fabric, how much Michaela liked the color. I listened, but I wasn't really hearing him. I was looking around at the life they'd built. The expensive photographs on the wall, beach vacations, ski trips, city skylines, all of them, just the 2 of them. There wasn't a single picture of me, not even one of Walter. I asked how they'd paid for it all, the renovations, the vacations, the furniture. Darren mumbled something about overtime and Michaela being a good saver. I let him finish before I said, You've never asked how I'm doing. Not once. You've never offered to help with the roof or the repairs or the washer that broke last winter. Do you even know that I'm still paying your mortgage? He froze. What, I've been covering it for 4 years. Before he could respond, Michaela appeared again. Darren Brad's looking for you. Something about a job at his firm. He nodded quickly, then turned to me. We'll talk tomorrow. Then he was gone. Michaela waited a beat, then turned to me. You shouldn't have come. I have every right to be here, I said. She leaned closer. Not every event is for everyone. Look around. What would you talk to these people about? Your garden, your back pain? I stood a little straighter. I came to celebrate my son's home. And your promotion. You did, she said, voice cool. Now it's time to go. You're asking me to leave? She didn't blink. You weren't invited. The room had quieted. I didn't turn to see how many were watching. I just looked at her, then said to Darren, who had reappeared by then. Say something. He shifted. Mom, maybe it's better if we talk tomorrow. I nodded. All right, I said, but remember this moment. And I walked to the door past the sofa, the crowd, and my son. Not one of them followed me out. Willow pulled into my driveway just before 8. The porch light was still on. I thanked her for the ride and told her I'd be all right, but she hesitated, watching me closely. I could tell she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she gave a small nod and said, Call me if you need anything before backing out onto the street. I stood at the door for a few seconds longer than I needed to, holding my purse in one hand and my empty fingers in the other. The gift I'd brought was gone. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked down the hallway and set my keys on the little table near the stairs. My shoes came off slowly. Then I leaned against the wall, still in my dress, and slid down to the floor. I don't remember how long I stayed there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. Long enough for the tears to come and go and come again. When I finally stood up, the house felt different, as if something had shifted. I washed my face and changed into my bathrobe. I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam until it disappeared. Then I picked up the phone. Loretta answered on the first ring. I was waiting, she said. I didn't say much at first. I told her about the way Michaela looked at me, the way Darren didn't say a word when she asked me to leave. I told her about the house, the new furniture, the framed photos, the people I didn't know filling every room. He just stood there, I said. She told me I wasn't invited, and he didn't stop her. Loretta didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "B, you have to stop paying that mortgage. Today." Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. I didn't answer right away. My hand rested on the side of the mug. The warmth had already faded. They'll lose the house, I said. Let them, she replied. You've done more than enough. We stayed on the phone for a long time. I don't know how much of it I absorbed, but Loretta's voice steadied me. By the time we hung up, I'd already made the decision in my mind. I just needed to carry it out. That night, I barely slept. I walked around the house, stopping now and then to look at the photographs on the walls. Darren as a toddler with chocolate on his cheeks. Walter in his work shirt standing proudly next to our first used pickup truck. None of those pictures hung in Darren's house. In the morning, I called the bank. The woman on the line was polite professional. She confirmed the payment, $1,200 withdrawn every month on the 15th. Would you like to cancel it completely or just pause it? She asked. I looked out the window while she waited. A squirrel darted across the garden bed, scattering the mulch I had spread last week. Cancel it, I said. Effective today. She read back the confirmation number. I wrote it down, but I didn't need it. The act itself was the thing I'd remember. I sat in the kitchen, hands folded in front of me, and waited. Not for anything in particular. Just waited. The phone buzzed, not even 20 minutes later. Darren. I let it ring once, then again. On the third call, I picked up. Mom, he said, relief in his voice. I've been trying to reach you. I wanted to apologize. Michaela was just stressed. The promotion, the guests, I didn't let him finish. She asked me to leave Darren, in front of everyone. I know, he said. I should have done something. I froze. You told me to go, I said. That's what you did. He was quiet on the other end. I canceled the mortgage payment, I said, my voice even. The one I've been making every month for the past 4 years. What? His voice shifted. What mortgage? You missed 2 payments that first year. The bank contacted me as guarantor. I started paying to keep the house from going into default. There was a long pause. You've been paying all this time? Yes. But why didn't you say anything? You never asked, I said, and I knew what she'd say if she found out. He exhaled hard. Mom, we can't afford that payment without help. We're already behind again. Michaela doesn't know what to do. That's not my responsibility, I said. You're grown adults. You'll have to figure it out. Are you doing this because of the party, he asked. Is this revenge? No, I said. It's because I've finally decided to stop sacrificing my dignity for people who don't treat me like family. We talked for a while longer. He asked me to reconsider. Promised that Michaela would apologize. Promised things would be different. I told him I hoped they would be for his sake, but I wouldn't be resuming the payments. Later that afternoon, I went out into the garden. The roses needed pruning, and the ground was soft from last week's rain. I spent nearly 2 hours out there, hands in the dirt, trimming and weeding and thinking about nothing at all. It felt good to move without purpose. Just to move. By evening, I'd missed 3 more calls from Darren. I didn't pick up. The next morning, I made a simple breakfast, cleared the dishes, and scheduled the porch repairs I'd put off since last fall. The man I hired said he could come next week. I called the curtain shop and placed an order for new panels in the living room. And I called my hairdresser, asked for the soonest appointment she had. I didn't speak to Darren again that week. The silence didn't feel like a wound anymore. Just a quiet space where something used to be. On Sunday afternoon, I sat on the porch in a clean blouse, sipping tea and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, a dog barking down the block, a lawnmower humming a few streets over. The wind carried the smell of lilac from the corner of the yard. The same lilacs Walter planted the year we bought this house. I closed my eyes and let the breeze pass over my face. That Monday morning, I opened the windows and let the breeze move through the house. It smelled like honeysuckle from across the street. The porch man, Charlie, showed up early in a white truck with his name hand-painted on the door. He brought coffee in a paper cup and waved through the screen. I stepped out and met him at the front gate. He walked me through the plan again, what needed replacing, what could be salvaged. I asked about the steps, whether they'd be stable enough to support my weight when winter came. He said they would. "You'll be safe out here," he promised. I nodded, then went back inside while he got to work. It was the first time in years I'd paid for something just for me. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, just because it was needed, and I could. Later that afternoon, I sat in the kitchen flipping through the mail. In the stack was a letter with Michaela's handwriting on the envelope. It had no return address. I held it for a few minutes unopened, then set it aside. I already knew what it would say. Apologies, explanations, something about emotions running high. I didn't need to read it, not right now. That week I made a habit of walking again, just around the block, down to the corner where the big willow tree bends toward the sidewalk. Sometimes I'd pass Willow's house, and we'd sit out on her back steps and talk about nothing in particular. She never pushed, never asked how I was feeling unless I offered. That quiet space mattered more than I could explain. Thursday morning, I stopped by the local community center. I hadn't been inside since Walter passed. The woman at the desk, Jamie, was new. Young, kind eyes. She showed me a flyer for a new class they'd started, basic accounting for retirees managing fixed incomes. I didn't need it, not really, but I signed up anyway. Something about it felt right. On the way out, I noticed a bulletin board near the exit. One corner was crowded with cards from local handymen and piano teachers. In the middle was a neatly pinned flyer for a part-time administrative job at the Veterans Clinic over on Hamilton. 3 mornings a week. Filing phones, simple scheduling. I wrote down the number and put it in my purse. That evening, while watching the news, I took the flyer out and smoothed it flat. The corner had bent in my purse. I looked at it for a while, then picked up the phone and dialed. A woman named Angie answered. Her voice was steady, warm. She said they'd been having trouble keeping someone regular. I asked if experience was required. She said, "Just a good head on your shoulders and patience with old men who like to talk." I said I had both. She invited me to stop by next Monday. That Sunday, I baked a peach cobbler for Loretta and wrapped it in a tea towel. She had helped me hold my center during that first long night, and I wanted her to know I hadn't forgotten. We sat on her back porch and talked until the sun went down. At one point, she asked if Darren had called. I said he had. Twice more. I hadn't picked up. She didn't press. On Monday morning, I arrived at the clinic 10 minutes early. The receptionist waved me back to a small corner office with 2 windows and an old desk. Angie was waiting, wearing a cardigan and a smile. She introduced me to Harold, a retired Navy mechanic who'd been helping her with supplies, and Eileen, who ran the front desk, but hated the computer. I was given a list of tasks and shown how to log hours. The work was simple, satisfying. I stayed 3 hours and left with a folder full of intake forms to organize. That afternoon, when I returned home, I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house. I set down my purse, kicked off my shoes, and opened the fridge. Leftover soup, a half-cut cucumber. I made a sandwich and sat out on the new porch steps, still smelling faintly of fresh wood and paint. A few minutes later, the mail truck rolled up. The driver handed me a small envelope. Another letter from Darren. His name was scrawled across the front, the way he used to sign permission slips in high school. I held it for a while, then walked inside and placed it on the counter next to Michaela's. The phone rang later that evening. It was Loretta. She was thinking of organizing a yard sale next weekend and wanted to know if I had anything to put out. I told her I'd take a look in the shed. After we hung up, I stepped out back, opened the old wooden door and let the sunlight in. Inside were years of quiet storage. Walter's tool chest, a folding chair with a torn cushion, a stack of unused birdhouses from the summer I'd thought about selling them at the farmer's market. I started clearing space, wiping off dust. It felt good to make room. I moved slowly without hurry. Behind one of the boxes, I found an old metal sign. It said, "Welcome home in faded paint." I leaned it against the porch railing, unsure whether to keep it. I'd brought it out the day Darren and Michaela first moved in next door. He never asked where it came from. That night, I made tea and sat with a book. I didn't answer the phone when it rang again. It started with a knock at the door. Not the front one Darren had come around back where the old garden gate still squeaked when it opened. I'd been trimming the basil by the porch and heard his footsteps on the gravel. When I turned, he was standing there, with both hands in his pockets and a worn look on his face. He didn't say hello right away, just gave a soft nod toward the porch steps and asked if he could sit. I hesitated for a second, then gestured toward the railing. He sat elbows on his knees, eyes scanning the yard. For a while, neither of us spoke. The breeze rustled the ivy on the fence, and somewhere down the street, a lawnmower kicked on. Finally, he looked over at me. "We're behind again," he said, "on the mortgage." I didn't respond. I wasn't surprised. He kept going. Michaela's hours got cut. My consulting gig dried up in April. We tried to keep up, but it's been tight. I clipped another sprig of basil and laid it in the basket beside me. "We don't know what to do," he said. "We might lose the house." I stood up, wiped my hands on the towel hanging from my waistband, and looked at him. "I told you weeks ago I wouldn't keep paying." He nodded. "I know. I just thought, I guess I hoped you'd change your mind." I walked past him and into the kitchen. He followed. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. From the window, I could see the bird bath half full of leaves. A cardinal dipped its beak, shook its wings. He sat at the table while I made tea. When I placed the mug in front of him, he reached for it with both hands like he used to when he was little. We sat in silence again. Then he said, "Michaela wants to talk to you." I looked at him. "Why now?" "She thinks there's a way we can work this out. She has ideas. Maybe if we sold the car and cut back on the extra expenses we could." I stopped him with a glance. "Darren, this isn't about budgeting." He looked away. "I've supported you both for years," I said quietly. "Not just financially. I showed up when she didn't want me there. I stayed quiet when I could have spoken up. I even let her speak to me like I was an intruder in your home." He didn't argue, just stared at the table. "You'll need to figure things out now," I said. "The two of you." He set the mug down carefully. "Okay," he said. "I just wanted to try." I nodded. He stood, gave a small thank you, and walked out the way he came. That evening, Michaela showed up alone. She rang the front doorbell, which she never did before. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. She stood on the porch, holding a folder under one arm, and wearing a blazer too formal for the heat. She got straight to it. "I know we got off on the wrong foot," she said. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way." I waited. She glanced down, then back up. I was overwhelmed. "The house, the people, the work you told me to leave," I said. She pressed her lips together. "I know, and I'm sorry." We stood there a moment longer. Then she said, "I drew up a plan. If you could agree to pay just the principal for 6 more months, we could refinance. Then it's off your shoulders entirely." She opened the folder and started pointing at numbers, interest rates, bank letters. I didn't look. "I won't be paying anything more," I said. "Not $1." Her hands stilled. You don't understand. We're not going to qualify on our own. Then you'll have to downsize. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Darren grew up in that house. It's part of your family's history. I stepped back into the doorway. Then maybe you should have treated me like part of it. She didn't say anything. I watched her gather the papers and slip them back into the folder. When she left, I closed the door and locked it. I leaned against it for a moment, then walked into the living room, pulled the envelope with Darren's handwriting off the table, and opened it. It was 3 pages long. The first was an apology. The second was a breakdown of expenses. The third was a request. Could I sign the attached co-signer form for a second mortgage? I folded the pages back up, returned them to the envelope, and placed it in the kitchen drawer. The next morning, I called Angie at the clinic and asked if she needed extra help this week. She said she did. I worked 2 extra shifts, helped Harold reorganize the medical files, and made a fresh pot of coffee every morning. By the end of the week, I'd put the co-signer form through the shredder and taken the pieces out to the trash. On Saturday, I met Loretta at the farmer's market. We browsed the stands, tasted fig preserves, and picked out a small batch of summer tomatoes. She asked if I'd heard from Darren again. I told her no. Back home, I made a sandwich and sat out on the porch with a paperback. The welcome home sign still leaned against the railing. I didn't move it. The wood had begun to dry in the sun, curling slightly at the edges. Later that evening, I swept the porch and put a fresh bulb in the light above the door. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly sweet from the neighbor's grill. I stood for a while, watching the sky darken, and when the porch light blinked on, I turned and went back inside. 3 days passed without a word. Then, just before noon on Wednesday, there was a knock at the door. Not the back gate this time. This was the front, sharp and hurried. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it. 2 men stood there. The one closest to me wore a dark gray suit, younger than I expected, a tablet in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The second man stayed a step behind, a little older, in khakis and a polo with the bank's logo stitched over the chest. Mrs. Wembley, the first one asked. I nodded. I'm Andrew Cartwright, Mortgage Compliance Officer with Southeastern Trust. This is my colleague Tom Weller. We're here in reference to the property at 1107 Hillstone, which we understand you co-own with your son, Darren Wembley. I didn't answer right away. Andrew continued. We've come to confirm occupancy and to follow up on the refinancing application submitted last week. My hand tightened slightly on the edge of the door. I didn't submit anything. Tom, the one in the polo, glanced down at the clipboard. It's listed here as co-signed by you. Documents have your signature. I opened the screen door wider and stepped onto the porch. Let me see it. Andrew held up the tablet and pulled up a scanned file. It was my signature, all right, except it wasn't. The slope of the letters was wrong. The E was too tight. I knew my own handwriting. That wasn't it? I looked up at him. That's forged. They exchanged a glance. Andrew cleared his throat. In that case, we'll need to escalate this to our fraud investigation unit. Until that's resolved, all pending actions on the loan will be suspended. Do you mind if we come in for a brief statement? I shook my head. No. You can take your statement right here. It took 15 minutes. I answered their questions calmly, explained that I had stopped assisting Darren financially, told them about the envelope, the letter, the form he'd asked me to sign. I didn't speculate, just told them what I knew. After they left, I stood on the porch for a while, looking out at the yard. The welcome home sign had fallen sideways in the flower bed. I didn't pick it up. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Darren showed up. He didn't knock. He came around the side, same way he always had, and opened the gate without asking. I heard the latch click and met him on the back steps. You called the bank? he asked, voice sharp. No, I said. They called me. He looked at me, something behind his eyes hardening. You're making a mess of this. I didn't forge anything. I didn't. He stopped. Took a breath. It wasn't like that. Michaela thought you'd say yes eventually. She thought it would move things along. I didn't speak. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said. I'm finally seeing it in proportion. He opened his mouth again, but didn't speak. Just turned and walked back through the gate, slamming it shut behind him. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my file drawer. Inside were the house documents, deed, insurance, tax history. I read through every page, carefully, slowly. At the bottom of the folder was the quitclaim deed I'd signed years ago, transferring part ownership to Darren when he and Michaela moved in. Back then, it felt generous, practical, like something a mother should do. I set the paper down, then picked up the phone and called a name I'd written on a sticky note 3 weeks earlier. Marcia Tillman, estate attorney. We met the next morning at her office downtown. She wore rimless glasses and had a calm, even way of explaining things. I told her everything. She listened, took notes. Then she said quietly, "You have options." We filed a report with the county office, and she reached out to the bank's fraud department directly. By Friday, I had a notarized letter in hand confirming a full hold on any changes to the mortgage. Saturday morning, I drove to the county records office. The woman at the desk recognized Marcia's name and processed the filing without delay. I handed over the fee in cash and left with copies of everything. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store and picked up a rotisserie chicken, some butter rolls, and a small lemon pie. Loretta came over later that evening. We sat on the porch, ate in silence, and watched the streetlights flicker on. She reached for another roll and said, "You did the right thing." I didn't answer. Just passed her the butter. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind carried in the sound of rustling branches and something faintly metallic, a wind chime 2 houses over. It was the first full night's sleep I'd had in weeks. Monday morning came with sun through the blinds and a knock on the door at 9. This time, it was a courier. A man in uniform handed me a thick envelope signed for delivery. Inside were legal papers. Darren and Michaela were contesting the freeze on the loan. I set them on the table, then went to boil water. I wasn't rattled. I wasn't scared. I knew now what lines had been crossed, and I was no longer standing on their side of them. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper. I sat beside Marcia at the petitioner's table, hands folded in my lap. Darren was across from me, jaw tight, wearing a dark suit I didn't recognize. Michaela sat beside him, one hand clutched around her purse, the other gripping a highlighter she never once used. The judge was a woman named DeWitt. Calm voice, firm eyes. She looked at the file in front of her for a long time before speaking. "Mrs. Wembley," she said, "we have here a claim of forged signatures, unauthorized financial applications, and a contested quitclaim deed. Before we proceed, I'd like to hear your account in your own words." I nodded, adjusted the microphone, and told her everything. I kept my voice steady. I didn't embellish. Just the facts: when Darren and Michaela moved in, when the finances started to shift, when the envelope appeared, when the bank came knocking. I told her about the call to Marcia, the visit to the records office, and the documents I found in the drawer. When I finished, Judge DeWitt turned to Darren. His attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client maintains that Mrs. Wembley was fully aware of the refinancing process and only changed her mind after being influenced by outside parties. He further asserts that the signatures in question were acquired under mutual understanding, though he acknowledges the absence of independent witnesses." DeWitt raised an eyebrow. "So you admit the documents were signed without formal legal verification?" There was a pause. "Yes, Your Honor," the attorney replied. Marcia stood. We have handwriting analysis from 2 certified experts stating the signatures were not made by my client, and we have security footage from the day of the bank submission showing only Mr. Wembley and his wife present. Mrs. Wembley was not on site and was in fact in a separate location confirmed by time-stamped grocery store receipts and neighborhood camera footage. DeWitt flipped through the pages. I've reviewed those exhibits. Darren looked straight ahead, jaw clenched. Michaela didn't look up. Mr. Wembley, the judge, said I'd like to ask you directly. Did you submit that refinancing request without your mother's knowledge? He hesitated, then finally said, We thought she'd agree. We didn't think it would matter. It was just to buy time. DeWitt didn't react. That is not how financial consent works, nor how signatures work, nor how housing rights work. She turned back to me. Mrs. Wembley, your counsel has also submitted a motion to restore sole ownership of the property under grounds of duress and fraud. Is this correct? Yes, Your Honor. And to sever financial ties to both respondents, yes. Marcia handed over the deed history, the original agreement, and a notarized affidavit. The judge read it silently, then leaned forward. I'm granting full injunctive relief to the petitioner. All attempted financial actions by the respondents related to the property are hereby void. The quitclaim deed is overturned on grounds of bad faith and lack of informed consent. She paused. Additionally, given the risk of continued coercion, I am ordering a cease and desist on all financial contact. Mrs. Wembley, your home finances and legal standing are restored in full. The gavel came down quietly. Darren stood up. I expected him to say something, but he didn't. He just looked at me not with anger, but disbelief, as if he'd just realized something too late. Michaela pulled at his sleeve, whispering something through her teeth. They left without another word. Marcia gathered the papers, slid them into her briefcase, and touched my arm. You did well. Outside, the sun was high and warm. I walked slowly to the car. Loretta was waiting in the driver's seat engine, running 2 paper cups in the console between us. She handed me one. How'd it go? It's done, I said. It's finally done. We didn't speak much on the drive home. Just let the wind through the windows and the quiet between us settle. When I stepped back into the house, I paused just inside the door. It was mine again, not just on paper, not just by law, but in feeling. The air felt different. I walked through each room like I was seeing it fresh. In the living room, the framed photo of me and James on our wedding day still sat on the shelf. I straightened it slightly. In the hallway, I reached up and pulled down the dusty sign Darren had hung months ago, Welcome Home, and folded it in half. I carried it outside, dropped it in the trash bin, and shut the lid softly. Later that evening, I made a small pot of soup, fed the cat, and sat by the window with a book I hadn't touched in weeks. I didn't get past the first page. I just listened to the quiet. The following morning, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet again, but not in the way it had been before. It felt still, not tense. The floors didn't creak like they were holding their breath. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table while the sky turned from gray to gold. Around 7, Loretta stopped by with a bag of groceries and a tin of lemon muffins. She didn't ask anything, just unpacked the bag and poured us each a cup. We sat in the den for a while, listening to the hum of the neighbor's lawnmower, the chime of birds in the hedges. She glanced at the deed folder still resting on the coffee table. Feels like it belongs here now, she said. I nodded. Later that day, I walked through each room again. I picked up old picture frames, dusted the windowsills, opened the closet in the guest room I'd stopped using months ago. There was a sweater of Michaela's still hanging behind the door. I folded it neatly, placed it in a paper bag, and set it by the front steps. I didn't need it in the house anymore. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness. I just wanted space that was mine again. A week passed. Then 2. The mail quieted down. No more credit notices. No more urgent envelopes with red lettering. Just the usual catalogs and a birthday card from an old church friend in Arizona. I baked for the church potluck again this time, blueberry crumble and sweet corn muffins. The new choir director stopped me afterward and asked if I'd consider helping with Sunday readings. I said I'd think about it. One evening, I found a small photo tucked behind the recipe box. Darren must have left it there. It was an old snapshot, him at maybe 12, holding a fish half his size, James kneeling beside him in a sun hat, both of them grinning. I looked at it for a long time, thumb pressed lightly at the edge. Then I slid it back into the box. I wasn't ready to throw it away. Maybe I never would be. Darren hasn't called. Neither has Michaela. But that's all right. Some doors don't have to be slammed shut. Sometimes they just stop opening, and that's enough. I've started planting again. The front bed was full of weeds, but I cleared it out. Put in some marigolds, rosemary, a few tomatoes just for fun. I don't know if they'll take, but I like checking them in the mornings. I like the feel of the soil between my fingers. This house has seen so much James building that back deck in the spring of '89. Darren losing his first tooth at the dinner table the Christmas we got snowed in and ate nothing but soup and peanut brittle. And yes, it also saw my son turn cold, my trust broken, my name signed without my hand. But I took it back. I stood up when it counted. Not loud, not fast, but firm. And now, when I turn the key in the door each night, I don't feel dread. I feel peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because I chose dignity over fear. Because I let go of what hurt me and held on to what grounded me. Because I remembered who I was before they tried to rewrite me. This house is mine. But more than that, it's me again. Thanks for sitting with me through all of this. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own space or doubted your voice when you knew the truth, just know you're not alone. You matter. You always did. If this story reminded you of something from your own life, I'd be honored if you shared it in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, I hope you'll stay a while. Take good care.